Everybody says that color is the most impactful part of a design, but no one explains exactly how to build a palette that really works. It's just one of those mystical design things you're supposed to know somehow. So today I'm breaking down the 4 types of color palettes that I use for every project after experimenting with color palettes for 20 years. Plus the guidelines that I follow to make sure that I'm making accessible, versatile, useful palettes every single time. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to approach color palettes like a pro. Plus, I'll give you my complete color palette guide as a free PDF, so you can come back to it whenever you need a little help. Let's dive in. If we're just meeting, I'm Janelle. I've been a freelance graphic designer for 15 years now, but I've been obsessed with color for way longer than that. Way before I took formal color theory classes in art school, it was smearing around color palettes at 14 in acrylics and oils that made me fall in love with art and want to do this with my life in the first place. For the first couple of years that I was freelancing though, I would pick palettes for projects based on colors that I just liked. Once someone told me, I can always tell the brand that you've designed because it's in your favorite colors. Oops, that's not good. That's when I started trying to choose palettes based on actual strategy, and letting the research and mood boarding process really dictate the color palette, instead of it just being like whatever color I was vibing with that day. A lot of people say you should start here with color psychology. I don't particularly find that helpful because different colors mean different things in different industries. So you can't just be like, well, green means health and red means passion, because depending on whether you're talking about like food or banking, those colors are going to mean very different things. We also now live in a world where choosing accessible color palettes becomes really vital and important, and it's also kind of confusing. So knowing not just what colors you like, but how to make combinations that are actually accessible and useful for people is really important. Eventually I realized it's not just about picking good color combinations. It's about looking at the project you're working on and deciding what kind of palette is the right answer for that project, and then filling out that palette from there. The first thing I want you to understand is that not all color palettes are trying to do the same job, and different projects are going to need different amounts of color. So as a disclaimer, these are my names for these. I've never heard anyone actually have official names for different types of color palettes, but this is the terminology that I use when I'm looking at a project from the beginning in the early strategy phase, trying to decide what kind of palette would be a good fit. The first option is a hero palette. This is when you have one primary color that represents the brand. You might have a few additional accents or supplementary colors that kind of fill it out, but you want one color that is completely connected and associated with that brand. This is a great choice when you want really strong brand recognition and you want to be able to stand out and have an easy association with a brand with minimal space. Think Coca-Cola Red or Tiffany Blue. If I can say a vague color name with a company and you know exactly what shade I'm talking about, they're doing it right. The key principle here is to choose one strong, recognizable color, ideally to get the Pantone number, so that way when you're using it across print mediums and different applications, it's always consistent. And then create a couple of strong, high contrast color combinations that can be used as little supplements within that palette, but you're really focusing on that one hero color. The second option is what I call a vibe palette. This is one of my favorites. The idea here is that instead of having one strong color, you're creating a kind of harmonious little world to live in. You're building a small, balanced palette, a couple of heroes, some accents, and a couple of neutrals that all kind of play in the same world and create an overall feeling of the brand. It's not about one specific color, but a general vibe and atmosphere that conveys the mood that you want to give. This is a great choice when you have a brand that's going to be in a lot of different applications. You might want to have some illustrations or patterns. It might have a website and packaging, so you want some different color combinations and options that can guide the eye in different applications. No one color needs to be the star, but they all kind of work together to get across a certain vibe. It doesn't really need to be very bright or poppy. It can be neutral or earthy, but all of the colors create an atmosphere that you can work with. The third option is a minimal palette. This is when you don't really want a lot of loud color to be the star of the brand, but you still need to really think through a palette that can back up everything you're doing and give you a lot of options. You can create really subtle, sophisticated palettes that are more about texture than they are any one color, but you still have to think about accessible font pairings and how to have enough variation in the palette that you can actually print things and know what colors are your lights and darks and different options for backgrounds or buttons. You still have to think it through, even if color is not the main focus. This is great for luxury brands or professional services, when conveying a certain sophistication or mood is more important than grabbing attention on like a shelf, for example. The key principle here is to choose an array of colors that are softer and less intense, or maybe nature-inspired, but they still need to be really thoughtful, and you need to think through the contrast of those colors so that you can still have things that are really accessible and legible. The final option is what I call an extended palette. This is for when you want to choose a strong array of accent colors to tell a larger story. So maybe you have multiple products or services, and you want to use different accent colors to indicate the different products or flavor. Maybe you want to have a lot of patterns or illustrations, and so having a lot of different accent colors means you can have a lot of variety in the different textures and things that you're using. Ultimately, this is great when you want color to really be a central part of the brand, and you need a lot of different extensions or applications of the brand. Again, this doesn't have to mean only like bright and poppy and primary colors, but it does mean that you're thinking more about an extended color palette and choosing a lot of options that give you a lot of room to play. My general rule of thumb when I'm choosing an extended palette is to choose one primary color, 3 secondary colors that are primarily what I'm going to use with that color, and then 5 to 8 accent colors or shades that I can use sparingly, but use them when I'm doing different like product variations or I need very different versions of something. This general rule gives you a really wide field to play in, but you still have a primary focus for the brand and it doesn't just feel like confetti. All right, now let's talk about accessibility. No matter what kind of palette you choose, you have to think about balance so that things feel good together, but also so that they're legible for everyone. First, you gotta think about contrast. No matter how pared down your palette is, you still need to have at minimum 1 light, 1 medium, and 1 dark color for contrast and legibility. Your light and dark can be white and black, but you have to have some version that can lay on top of each other to be able to be legible. There's a great website called the Color Palette Library, and they have a free tool where you can plug in any color combination and it will give you an accessibility rating of exactly how legible and accessible that color combination is. Every color palette needs to have high contrast pairings so that if you put any background with any word, it can actually be legible in any screen size. It's really important. The designer behind that color palette library has a really great video explaining the color spectrum and how to choose high contrast pairings. I'll link it below because it's really well done and way more in depth than I have time for in this video. Another way that I like to think about it is to choose palettes like you're putting together a capsule wardrobe. If you're familiar with that concept, it's that you put together a closet by choosing pieces that can all mix and match and work together. If you have one top that you can't wear with any of your bottoms, then it doesn't fit in the capsule wardrobe. And that's the same idea with the color palette. If you have 30 bright tops but only 2 bottoms to wear them with, then that's not really a balanced wardrobe. And it's the same thing with colors. The number of each type of color that you choose is going to vary depending on what type of palette you're working with. But what kinds of colors you pick is going to be the same across every palette. You're going to need neutrals, hero colors, accents, and darks. The number of those is going to change depending on the palette, but the principle is the same to create a cohesive capsule. Once you know what kind of palette fits the strategy of your project, you can kind of reverse engineer all of the rest to make sure you have a really balanced, accessible, useful palette to fit that need. All right, so you have all these building blocks, but how do you know what type of palette your project needs? The first question to ask is, how much weight does the brand need to lift? Does it need to work across different applications? Does it need to grab attention on a retail shelf or a really crowded market like an app store? Will there be sub-brands or multiple product offerings? Does color need to separate this brand from its competitors? Those questions will help you determine exactly how much color you need and what kind of palette might be a good fit for it. Second, what's the brand personality and their end goal? Do they need to speak to a specific audience? Do they want to feel understated or really striking? Is color going to carry the brand or be a backup player for other elements? Does it need to have a lot of personality or does it need to be more muted? Then you want to think about context and restrictions. Look at what's already in that industry. Do you want this brand to feel really familiar and a part of that narrative, or really set apart and stand out from its competitors? Are there any direct competitors with colors that you need to avoid? Are there any production constraints? Is this going to be printed or screen printed or embroidered? Those kind of require more limited color palettes because the format means that every additional color is more expensive. That's really going to guide your color choice. I have way more to say on this than I could fit into one video, so I put together a free little guide for you. It walks through everything we just talked about, plus some of my favorite approaches for how to find good colors, and some really good tools and apps that help me find colors better. It's totally free, it's on my website, I'll put the link in the description. If you want to see a really extended palette in action, check out this video. I made a brand for the Smithsonian Women's History Museum as part of my Dream Client series, and I used a really extended palette for a lot of different brand extensions. I had a lot of fun doing it, and it's a good example of how much color can really carry your brand. I'll see you there.